Welcome to the Ad Nauseam Podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 94 of the Ad Nauseam Podcast. My name is Dr. Jeff Winkle, and I'm here down in the vomitorium bunker with my good friend and co-host, Dr. David Noe. How you feeling today, Dave?
I'm doing okay.
You're doing okay?
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, those are the two initials I would choose to place before the description of my feelings.
Your feelings, okay. So just kind of somewhere in the middle you are
Somewhere
today.
in the middll.
All right.
An O and then a K.
Okay.
Is where I'm feeling. How about you?
I'm feeling pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah, it's
PG.
It's a nice day outside. Mm-hmm. Kind of hang on to some of that nice late summer weather.
That's right.
So, but it's good be down here in the bunker.
We got some cool weather coming along.
We do. I haven't looked ahead.
Yes,
Yeah.
upper to lower 50s for the evenings. It's going to be good sleeping weather.
Very good sleeping weather. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crack those windows open.
Correct. How are you doing with your walking? You know, your big summer stroll.
Maybe it's kind of petered out.
Has your job gotten in the way?
A little bit, but it's I think I mentioned in the last show I was up north for a week,
Right.
which was kind of lazing about the beach and got out of my routine. And for me, it's very difficult to kind of get back into it.
Right. They say that a habit takes only, 2 incidents to break and something like 35 to form.
It's just not fair.
It isn't
it's
fair.
not fair.
It should be the other way around.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Well, you're a hard habit to break, Jeff.
Oh, are you quoting that Chicago song?
am, yeah.
I almost want to break into it right now.
It's Peter Cetera, right?
It is. Yes.
Yeah. I wonder if his middle name is Et.
That's nice.
Thanks.
Well done.
So what are we talking about?
We're talking about the Renaissance.
Okay.
And the concept of the dignity of man
All right.
today. Yes.
Are we qualified to talk about this?
Not-
2 individuals with no dignity whatsoever?
Not at all. But I think of you as a Renaissance man.
Do you?
And I'm not blowing smoke here.
I'm okay with empty flattery.
Yeah.
I could use some.
Yeah. But so I think I admire you for the many things that
That's very
that
kind
you're
of
able
you.
to do. And so
The secret is I do them all poorly.
is that what
Anybody
it is?
can do a lot of things if they don't do them well.
I gotcha. So we define a Renaissance man as just someone who just does a lot of stuff,
Well, and does them well.
does them well.
Right. That's the key. But I appreciate that. That's kind.
But this is some heavy stuff. Because we're not
It is.
just talking about Renaissance men, Renaissance women. We're talking about kind of the concept of
That's
humanity.
right. Where the idea came from.
Right. So
Mm-hmm.
this is really interesting. So I'm always I always get a little
I know.
twitchy when we get out
I
of
know.
anything past Constantine.
I know.
I know. So I'm relying on you to kind of to pull the weight here.
Well, what I think is when it comes to weight, I can pull. But what I think is the key is to have intellectual curiosity. I do not in any way present myself as an expert in these matters.
Right.
My expertise is narrow, and I would say probably yours is too.
Yes.
My expertise is Cicero and to a lesser extent Plato. But, we can read, we can study, and the goal is to be a good student.
Right.
And hopefully to present to our audience some kind of map of how to be a good student of these things, not to be an expert.
Exactly. I think of it in terms of like a Socratic ideal. We're not
That's
trying
right.
to kind of come to a period at the end of the sentence.
No.
But there's value in discussing these things and being curious about them.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And when it comes to the Renaissance, I read an interesting article, this was 30 years ago maybe, the title of which was Specialization is for Insects.
Really?
Yes. And it was kind of a screed, kind of an argument for try to do a lot of interesting things with your life.
Yeah.
It's better to try and fail than never to have tried at all or something like that.
That sounds like another Chicago song.
Yeah, I know. Well, if you see me walking by and the tears are in my eyes, look away, baby.
Away. Oh,
Baby, look away.
that's from the post Peter Cetera era.
Really? Was
Yeah.
he gone?
He was gone. But
Who was singing then?
I can't remember. The guy that's still with that band.
Really?
I don't know his name.
Yeah.
Though. Yeah.
I was so surprised, speaking of digressions, when I learned that Saturdays in the Park, I think it must have been the 4th of July.
Yeah.
That's a Chicago song.
That is a Chicago, like early Chicago.
Because it has nothing to do with the typical romantic, melodramatic schmaltz
No.
on which they filled their bank accounts.
Right, exactly. That was kind of the 70s when they were kind of the big horn. They always have had horns in their band, but they were
Right.
like a horns out in front kind of band.
Yeah.
That was pre Peter Cetera.
Did you like that style?
It's okay. I mean, so I find some of their stuff, their early stuff, interesting. The Peter Cetera stuff was always too schlocky for me.
Yeah, but it's so quotable in terms of I don't know, irony.
Yeah. And the sound of that in some ways kind of sums up the syrupy pop of the 1980s. Yeah.
Right. Well, we have a shout out, don't we, Jeff?
We do. This goes out to one Dr. Jeff Cray.
Cray.
Yeah.
It's an unusual spelling.
It is Kreh.
Yes.
I would look at that and I would say Kreh.
I would say the call letters for a Missouri radio station playing all classic rock.
All classic rock, right?
KREH.
All 80s weekend.
That's right.
KREH, yeah.
Would you say he's a little cray, as the kids say?
I'm guessing that he's never heard that one before.
Probably not.
Right. Well, who is this guy? Why is he getting a shout out?
Oh, well, he contacted us and he said a lot of really nice things about how he loved our vibe. He loved, I think he said something like pre and post-Christian pagan world, right? Which is our vibe, you might say. Our jam, as the kids say.
Oh, yeah, they say that all the time.
Our condiment.
Yes.
I'm lost already. And this fellow is doing some really interesting things. He heads up a college, and they teach a classically humane program, and it has a prison education initiative. Now, this is something I really admire. I admire an individual who tries to take, or who takes, the things that we love into a maybe uncommon, unfamiliar setting.
Yeah. It reminds me of, when I kind of read over what he's been doing. Have you known about that work of this? I'm forgetting the author, the guy who he wrote Achilles in Vietnam.
Oh yeah,
and he has
about PSTD.
Yes, and he has soldiers
PTSD.
Soldiers reading the Iliad and finding some kind of clarity and mental healing through that by kind of identifying with figures like Achilles in the book. And so I too am always kind of fascinated by when the classics find their way into places where you might not expect them to be.
Right.
Yes.
Well, very much in keeping with today's theme, the topic of today's episode, there's a common core of humanity. There's a nugget or a nougat at the center of each of us.
A nougat?
Exactly.
A Ted? Never mind.
And this is the basic thrust of our whole project.
Right.
Humanism, because I am a human being, I find nothing foreign to me. Nothing human is foreign to me, to quote Terence. So,
yes.
Of course, incarcerated individuals suffering from PTSD who have come back from the battlefield, of course they're going to find something sympathetic and maybe even helpful in the classics.
Yeah.
Because we're all human beings. We have a common thread.
Right.
We share a common thread.
Yeah, and I saw in the notes that you've sketched out here, kind of this concept of, we talk about humanity or the dignity of a human being. You wrote something about this is something that we all, I think every human being has kind of a general idea about.
Yes.
Whether even if they've never been asked to articulate it. But this is something that I think we all have kind of an idea of what that means. And here we're going to explore kind of where that idea came from, at least in the Western tradition.
And see whether there, if I may interrupt just a minute, to see whether there is any kind of uniform definition or consistency of understanding.
Yeah, exactly, right. So do we have an opening quote to get
Yes, we
started?
do. We do have it. Well, we should probably say thank you to Dr. Jeff Cray.
Absolutely.
For listening, for the work he's doing, keeping the torch lit. We're very appreciative.
And we hope to have him on the show someday, right?
Yeah,
right?
To talk about this prison initiative where he's teaching Plato and other things.
Fantastic.
In an incarcerated setting.
Yeah.
So the opening quote is from the article, which, as we mentioned in the last episode, forms the entire skeleton of this episode.
Yeah.
Very famous Renaissance scholar, the late Charles Trinkaus, Trinkaus. He wrote this book in 1983, University of Michigan Press, called The Scope of Renaissance Humanism. The Scope of Renaissance Humanism. So I read it, got it out of the library, loved it. There are places where it's a challenging read, and I like challenging reads, so it was tough for me in spots.
Yeah.
Liked it so much, I found a used copy, and now I can own it and mark it up.
Fantastic.
So the opening quote is from the very first page of the article, page 343. And this is what Charles says, Dr. Trinkaus. The dignity of man attained its greatest prominence and was given its characteristic meaning in the Italian Renaissance. As an idea, it is usually ill-defined and tends to express a complex of notions, classical and Christian, which writers of the period desired to assert. The word dignitas is a Latin rhetorical and political term indicating either the possession of high political or social rank or the moral qualities associated with it. It is used with great frequency by Cicero, who begins to give it some of the connotations of general worthiness it acquired during the Renaissance. It is derived from the same root as decus and decorum, the Sanskrit dakos, meaning fame. Mm-hmm. How's your Sanskrit, Jeff?
It's terrible.
So it's fine.
I need to brush up, yes.
So bad it doesn't exist. Cicero discusses dignity as the quality of masculine beauty as a subtopic to the fourth but most emphasized virtue to be sought by man, decorum, or propriety, which he derived from Panaetius's concept ta prepon. And this is from De Officiis. In the course of this discussion, Cicero applies the term dignity to the human race as that quality which distinguishes it from animals. So what do you make of that?
Well, one, I find it very interesting. This idea that dignitas, in its original meaning, seemed to have a much narrower scope.
Yes.
Right. This is something that belongs to the elite class.
Right.
It belongs to men.
Right.
And it's only those with kind of political acumen would be described as having dignitas, right? And
yes, I think that's generally right. There are examples of women having dignitas, but by and large, it is reserved to the male.
Right, and then I guess it doesn't surprise me that in the hands of Cicero, it starts to broaden, right?
Right.
We've talked about Cicero a lot on this podcast, and the zillion ways in which he shaped the Latin language almost single-handedly,
for sure,
is unbelievable. Not just in terms of the use of words, but in how they're used. Mm-hmm. And so this idea of kind of human worthiness being expanded in the hands of Cicero doesn't surprise me, but I find it fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that dignitas is related to decus, a word that means beauty. There's the famous quote from Horace where he describes Augustus as the decus et columen, right? The beauty and the foundation of Roman society.
Yeah.
Probably, a throwaway kind of flattering compliment.
Yeah.
But decus, beautiful, and decorum, the kind of beauty a man is supposed to display, that's the root of dignitas.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It comes down to my ignorance of Sanskrit. Right?
Yeah, mine
the
too.
Indo-European tree of languages.
Join the club, right?
Yeah.
But I find that this notion of dignity, the Renaissance idea of the dignity of man, is something that everyone, as you were saying, has some notion of, but it's very ill-defined.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting about this quote as well is that Cicero identifies dignitas as what distinguishes human beings from animals. Mm-hmm. I think that with the exception of certain cat piano videos, today people tend to think of the world of animals, the natural world, as possessed of great dignity.
Yes.
And the world of human culture and society as having hardly any.
Yes.
Except maybe in very narrow places. So let me give an example. If you see these images of lions, right, the male lion and the lioness out on the plain, and they're silhouetted against a setting sun or something, and there are no birds in the air. It's a picture of majesty.
Yes.
And that appeals to people.
Sure.
Right? Or the lonely bear out on the mountain ridge walking along. Those are images that are often used to indicate dignity,
yes,
it would seem to me.
Yeah.
But we don't find that in the portrayal of human beings, except maybe, I'm thinking of two counterexamples. Athletes, athletes that are very, very accomplished, the 1% of the elite athletes, they're pictured in certain poses with suffering and agony. There's a kind of dignitas portrayed by such an image.
Yes.
And the other would be very old people, wizened people.
Yes.
Who are performing some mundane task. There's a picture of their hands or something.
Yeah.
And you see the age lines. These are examples of dignitas. But for the most part, human beings are presented as comic, ridiculous kind of figures.
Yeah, I'd respond with a couple of things. I totally agree. I would say that I think our notion, our ill-defined common cultural notions of human dignity have been re-narrowed.
Yes.
Right. Not in any kind of organized kind of way.
Right.
But as you were talking to it, reminds me. I think a lot of view of the world and humanity and the world of animals, say like through a more kind of extremist environmental lens.
Okay.
Sees human beings as kind of a cancer, a blight on the land, right? And so when you see those images of the lions and the bears and the silhouettes, they kind of the core idea is that this is how it's supposed to be.
Right.
Human beings shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So there's kind of this notion of, it's almost kind of that noble savage.
I was thinking the same thing, but it's not just the noble savage, because the noble savage was always the human being.
Right.
Right now, it's the noble brute.
No, yeah, exactly. But I mean, they were the noble savage because in some ways, because they're closer to animals, right? They're closer to nature.
Well, separated from the corrupting influences of civilization.
Of culture and civilization,
Yes.
right? Exactly, right. So yeah, I think that's all kind of mixed up into the soup that we're at. But I think you're absolutely right that very few people, I think, are talking about kind of the innate human dignity. And if anything, if they talk about human beings' relation to animals, human beings are just another animal.
You're right.
Right, and they're a corrupting force more than they are than a source of refinement.
Can you think of any examples, though, in which human beings are presented as having, in pop culture, a common consensus, as having some kind of dignity? Do you think the elite athlete or the wizened old man or woman, whose hands show the vein lines of work and toil and care, but they're persevering in hard circumstance?
Like beyond, I think those are excellent examples.
I mean, is there a third? Are those two correct?
I would agree with both of those,
Okay.
right? And I think like with the athlete, certainly you have that aspect of like there's a beauty in kind of the agony and the suffering, right?
Yes.
Suffering towards a goal, but also in terms of visuals, the beauty of the human, the kind of the perfected human body.
I was thinking
right?
that as well, and so I was thinking that maybe images of really beautiful people, all of whom are young, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not people like us, but they're people between the ages of, say, 17 and 25.
But I mean, they would have to be images that aren't like sexualized, right? I mean, so beauty in and of itself is not. I don't see
right.
is not dignified. But someone like
it's also restricted to youth, right?
Right.
So youth and beauty are equated. There's no concept that a person can be old and beautiful, really.
Right.
By virtue of being young, you are beautiful.
Exactly.
That's what those images are saying.
But as you were talking about the athlete, I'm thinking like someone like Usain Bolt,
yeah.
right? Someone who the fastest man on the planet,
ever,
and
right.
watching him run and break these records. There's something just kind of otherworldly about it.
Yes.
Right? So it's a dignity of humanity, but I don't look at that and say, oh, I share a piece of that.
Yes. or the famous gymnast, is it Simone Biles? Is that her name?
Yes. Exactly.
A talent that's generational.
Right.
And you're right. You don't look at that and say, oh, she's a human being. I'm a human being. We have a common dignity.
Exactly.
No.
Let me get on my pommel horse.
No.
No.
Touch my toes, I can't see them. So there isn't that sense of
right.
common dignity. So it's different.
It is very different.
There's something different.
And something kind of sad, too.
I would say.
That has been lost, I think, since the Renaissance.
Since the Renaissance. Well, it was revived in the Renaissance, as we'll see as we go on this journey.
Right.
Somewhere since then, it has eroded.
It has eroded.
In a general conception.
I might be getting ahead of things, too, but even back in the Renaissance, I don't want to give the impression of, back in the Renaissance, everybody walking around Florence had this widespread, view of human dignity. It was still kind of an intellectual notion.
It was restricted to the people who thought about it.
An elite notion.
Yes. But there was some sense in which, because elites were admired, their ideas, to some extent, helped set the tone of how others thought about themselves.
Right.
In the same way that today, people don't know when Karl Marx lived. People don't know much about Sigmund Freud or Descartes, but their ideas are by and large derived from those epoch-making individuals,
right?
Even if they can't say who they were or what exactly they thought.
Wouldn't you also say that today, out in the culture, there's kind of a denigration of elites, a suspicion of elites and expertise?
I'm always uncomfortable around you with your PhD in classics. Yes, there's very little respect for expertise.
Yeah,
for sure, except in very narrow areas like dentistry.
Yeah,
right. If I hang up a sign outside my door, pull your teeth, 150 per cavity, I'm not going to get any traction with that.
Right. No, I think there's definitely more of a respect for expertise amongst what we might call the hard sciences.
Yes,
right?
And technical expertise of a very narrow kind.
Yes, but and deep suspicion of expertise in, say, in the social sciences.
That's right. Or even the humanities, right? Aesthetics.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So what are some other things that are ill-defined, but that everyone has some notion of?
How
about taxes?
Taxes?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, I always want to write things off, but I don't even know what a write-off is.
You just write them off. That's what people do. You just write them.
Do you know what a write-off is?
I know that there are things that you can deduct from your taxes.
Okay, that's called a write-off.
If they fall under a particular umbrella, right? So I know that I can deduct school supplies that Beck buys for her classroom.
What does that include?
That includes
pencils, erasers,
notebooks,
lunchbox,
paper.
Where does it end?
That's there's
shoelaces. You have to have shoes to get to school.
That's right. Exactly. She drives to school. She ride off her
gasoline.
Car. All right, we're getting into the ill-defined space.
Yes, we are. Okay. All right. Here's another example. Yeah. What makes a good snack?
Oh. What makes a good?
Well, some people say it's got to be savory, and other people say no, it must be sweet.
Got to be sweet. Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
What's your favorite snack?
Potato chips.
Potato chips?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I like things that are salty and very, very bad for me.
Okay.
Yeah, how about you?
Sticks to your finger? Well, for me, potato chips are more of a meal.
Really? A whole meal out of a pile of chips?
Yeah, you put them in a bowl and sprinkle some cheese on the top. You got a meal. That's a meal right there.
Okay. All right. Okay. And another one I see you have here is how long a nap should be.
Yes. There's so much conflicting advice on this.
Right.
Sometimes it keeps me from sleeping, actually.
Yeah.
Should it be 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Some people say if it's a 10-minute nap, that's not a nap.
Yeah.
You know, you enter REM and you leave it immediately.
Right.
It's like a revolving door.
Yeah, the advice I always got was a nap should not be longer than, say, 20 minutes.
Yes, I've heard that as well.
Or it's if it's less than 20 minutes, then it's not a nap, it's a power nap.
A power nap.
And that allows you to kind of wake up refreshed and maybe go a little bit longer and get more things done than if you had not napped.
But it's not really relaxing.
No.
You know what Winston Churchill said?
What did he say?
Well, lots of stuff. But in particular, it's not a nap if you don't take off your clothes.
So Winston was sleeping in the buff?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
No idea. No comment. The theme here is ill-defined notions.
All right.
Right?
All right. So we're going to talk about where this notion of human dignity comes from. And are we going to try to define it?
Yes.
Okay.
We're going to have to take a long and winding road as we trace this notion from antiquity to the Renaissance. So grab your bag of snacks,
chips,
maybe some huggable portions, and your walking shoes.
All right.
The wild and windy night that the rain washed away has left a pool of tears crying for the day. Why leave me standing here? Let me know the way.
What's that from?
You don't know this?
I recognize if I can't place it.
It's the Beatles.
Oh.
The Beatles.
Oh, it's the Long and Winding Road. It's like the song that Phil Spector ruined. Yeah.
Oh, really? How did he do that?
With that horrible orchestration.
You don't like it?
Oh, it's awful.
Dun, dun, to that long.
If that had just been Paul in front of the piano, much better song.
Oh, I liked it.
I mean, he ruined Let It Be. The whole album Let It Be.
Phil Spector is the Wall of Sound guy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Recently deceased and all around creep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get started then.
All right.
And we start with Cicero.
All right, your guy.
That's right.
Okay.
We already read that opening quote about ta prepon, the appropriate from Panaetius. This is from De Officiis, but we also have to take a look at De Natura Deorum.
Oh, which we talked about.
That's right.
Some length.
3 episodes.
Yes.
Keep your eye on the bulbus.
That's right. So Cicero debating with these guys. And,
that's right.
And they all had their own kind of school of thought that they were seeing the questions through.
Yep. Right? Stoics finally come to this was another of your titles.
Oh, man, that's cold.
So we had 3 different schools of thought, right? Epicureans, Stoics, and academics.
Yes.
So the Renaissance humanists, here I'm quoting from Drinkhouse again, page 344, found in Cicero another even more precise description of the excellence of the human species. And this one also derived from Stoic Middle Platonist Greek sources, most likely Posidonius. So these 2 guys, Posidonius and Panaetius, these are Hellenistic philosophers. They come between Plato and Cicero, and they hammered out so much of this.
Okay.
Unfortunately, very little of their work survives, except as fragments and in quotations by Cicero.
But Cicero had access to them.
That's right.
In his day. Yes.
Exactly. And so here, De Natura Deorum, part 2, remember, book 2, I mean to say, is, quote, the human race has been the special beneficiary of the immortal gods. So this is a Ciceronian Stoic idea that enters the debate about human dignity. Why are we made with dignity? because the immortal gods care for us. Deus consulera rebus humanis is the quote. The gods have concern for human affairs.
Right. And the implication there is more so than, say, the affairs or whatever you want to call them of animals.
That's right.
Okay.
Or any other part of the natural world. Right. Or to be more precise, the created world, as the Stoics would say.
Right. So we can already see it's anticipating or linking up with a Christian idea of human beings being the pinnacle of creation and created in the image of God.
Right. Depending on how you see it, it is either providence or the world's greatest coincidence.
Yes. Okay.
Providence means that God had, insinuated or insculpted into the Stoics, Plato, Homer, Cicero, and others, an idea that is extraordinarily similar to what is in the Christian scriptures.
Right.
And so that would be the providential idea. The coincidental idea would be the Greeks thought this up on their own. It happens to have some resonance with or overlap with what's in the scriptures.
Gotcha. Right. Which is, it's fascinating. I don't know if I want to tug at this thread too much, but
tug away.
If you look at what you might call the place of humanity in the Greek myths, it's pretty bleak.
It is,
right?
Well, in tragedy in particular, maybe not so much in the Homeric epics.
Well, in the epics, it's dignity is reserved for a very small slice of humanity, right? But if you look at the Greek myths, by and large, human beings they don't have the blessings of the gods.
No,
if anything, they're there to kind of serve the egos of the gods,
and they're sometimes objects of pity.
Yes,
as with Prometheus. Right. The Titan, he has pity on these poor human beings. And, takes away from them a knowledge of the day of their death.
Yeah.
And gives them fire because otherwise they're hapless.
They're hapless, and they're just another beast of the field, right?
Right.
And so that would make it all the more extraordinary that the philosophers from that same culture that produced these ideas about humanity and the gods would come up with this idea that's so close to kind of a Christian notion of human beings made in the image of deities.
Yes, well, what I think you're putting your finger on is something that I have become absolutely convinced of, and that is that Plato, from whom the Stoics took most of their cues, that Plato is unique in the Greek tradition.
Yeah.
He is a watershed point, a departure from Homer, for sure.
Right.
Follows, and I'm following Werner Jaeger there and his ideas.
Right.
And so the Stoics get this idea from Plato, Cicero from the Stoics. It is different from the older myth world.
It is. And, and Aristotle also talks about similar kinds of things, right?
Yes.
He's very interested in the idea of what distinguishes human beings from animals, right? And so one of the famous things that Aristotle says that, that human beings are political creatures, right? That we find our definition, our being, our meaning in the context of other people.
Yes, in relation to other persons, which requires speech.
Right.
Animals don't talk to one another, so far as I know.
Right.
Eddie Murphy and the Dr. Dolittle movies notwithstanding.
Have you seen those?
No.
No, me either.
There's another one, I think, with, what's his name? Robert Downey Jr. as Dr. Dolittle.
Are you serious?
Yes.
So they remade the
I
remake?
think your kids would be watching this.
No, that hasn't fallen into their
doesn't appeal to them.
They like things with swords and lasers.
Okay. So, no talking animals?
No.
Okay.
No.
So Trinkaus,
yes.
344. Long before the Renaissance human treatises on the dignity of man emerged, long before, he says, in antiquity, this cluster of ideas was blended with biblical conceptions of the nature and role of man in the universe within the history of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Mm-hmm. So here we have to introduce, end quote, the next character.
Okay.
Philo Judaeus.
Philo.
Yeah, so yes. Philo of Alexandria, the guy that invented baklava, if I'm not mistaken.
Is that right?
Yes, one layer of Philo, then another layer of Philo, then some walnuts.
Oh, yeah.
Is that right?
There's some honey in there?
Some honey.
Right, yeah, I love this guy.
No. So he's exegeting. What are his dates again here? What do we have?
We got 15 BC to 50 AD.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Philo is working in Alexandria. So he's called Philo Judaeus. He's also called Philo of Alexandria. He's exegeting Genesis 1:26. God said, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness," as well as 1:28, which is sometimes called the cultural mandate. Fill the earth, be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue it, have dominion over all the creatures.
Right.
So Philo Judaeus takes this and he compares it with Stoic, Peripatetic, that's Aristotle, and Platonic ideas, and he comes up with a synthesis of this notion of the dignity of the human being.
Mm-hmm. And he's kind of our patient zero here. Is this kind
You
of,
would say so,
okay.
yes.
All right.
Not for the concept of dignity, but for the blending
of these things.
Of these two, either enormously coincidental
right.
or providential ideas.
Right, and I think it's important to kind of recognize the Alexandria part
Absolutely.
of this title, right? I mean, it's a crossroads. It's a
hotbed
of cross pollination of ideas, and so Philo's in the right place at the right time.
Right.
I sometimes feel like Alexandria is it's kind of elbowed out of the out of kind of the conversation with so much
Definitely.
ideas compared to Roman Athens.
Well, it's not because of any kind of prejudice. It's just it's a fault of history.
Yeah.
Alexandria was pretty much devastated, wiped out in the 6th and 7th centuries AD.
Yeah.
The library burned down.
We lost Alexander's tomb, as we talked about.
That's right.
Yeah.
There was just it was the end of any kind of Western intellectual tradition.
Yeah.
There. There was a Muslim intellectual tradition, but I don't think Alexandria was a center for that even.
No,
so it kind of got eclipsed.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Right, but I think for our conversation here, Philo, whose dates, kind of roughly overlap with the life of Christ.
That's right.
He's in Alexandria at a time where it is kind of in some ways the intellectual center.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Right. More so than the other places you mentioned. Athens has been eclipsed. Rome is not interested in the life of the mind. It's just all military power.
You might say, Plato's Academy is still doing its thing.
It's kicking
in the Aristotle's Lyceum.
Right.
But in some ways, I think Alexandria kind of wins that.
Right.
If we're gonna rank them,
the focus has shifted east.
Yes.
Because of Alexander's campaigns and the Hellenistic era.
Exactly.
So Trinkhaus says 345. Philo stresses that the divine image in man is the mind.
Okay.
So here's an important distinction. Where does the image of God reside in human beings? I think today people are very reluctant to say that it's primarily intellectual. I've gotten so much pushback on that from people. Whenever we talk about, okay, so what does it mean to be made in God's image or to have the stamp of divine dignity, to use more pagan terms?
Yeah.
If you say, well, it means that you can reason, you can imagine, you can speak. There's a kind of anti-intellectualism that is bothered by that. And they say, well, that's Gnostic. That's Manichaean. What about the body?
Yeah.
Well, animals have bodies.
Right.
And their bodies are better than ours in so many ways.
Right. Yeah. No, it's interesting to kind of, to take it back to your earlier examples, like, the dignity of the athlete.
Right.
It really resides in what the body looks like and what it can do.
You're right.
But when you talk about the dignity of the elderly, it's the mind, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely. When I think about, imago Dei and what does that mean? I often will kind of default to the mind, to the intellectual,
and that is the standard Western answer,
right?
Whether you're pagan or Christian or Jewish or Muslim, but I'm saying that in our day that's no longer very popular,
right?
And I'm not sure exactly why.
When you get pushback on this, are you saying like from other Christians?
Yes.
So where does their kind of argument for like the body come in?
They say that what I'm saying sounds like a mind-body duality.
Oh, I see. Right? Okay.
Oh, you're denigrating the body. No. I realize that you couldn't exercise imagination, reasoning, poetry, philosophy without a body.
Yeah.
But not all those creatures that have bodies can do those other things.
Right.
So it seems really simple to me, but no.
Okay.
No, they don't buy it. Also interesting, you mentioned the athlete again.
Mm-hmm.
In interviews with superior and elite athletes, obviously you have to have a certain body type to do some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But they will routinely say that it's all mental, right?
Yeah.
They will say, well, I really have to get in the right mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so, beat me because they were just in a better mindset.
Yeah.
So even at those elite levels, there's some recognition that there has to be something more than physical superiority.
Right. I'm a veteran of 2 marathons.
Oh.
And
I'm in distinguished company here.
So I distinctly remember training for and then running the Chicago Marathon in 1998. And you do everything that I read, everything that when talking to people, they say you're going to reach a point. You're going to reach usually around mile 20, where if you don't have the mental toughness, you are not going to make it,
right?
Because the body will fail you,
right?
And it was an incredible mental challenge, especially those last 6 miles. And so I get that completely.
Right.
Yeah.
I was reading about Rafael Nadal, the Spanish tennis whiz.
Player. Yeah.
And apparently, I guess it would have been Wimbledon. Not sure. Whatever he was playing recently, he had virtually no feeling in his left foot.
Wow.
And yet he managed to win multiple. Maybe he even won the tournament. I can't remember.
That's incredible.
But it's an example, once again, of an elite athlete who still, most of the effort goes into, when all the physical training is done,
right,
a kind of mental acuity.
Right. I just finished a documentary on Tiger Woods, and
producing it, directing it.
It was about him.
Oh, watching it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, so much talk about that he worked his body, and he trained in a way that no other golfers were training. But everybody always talks about Tiger's mental toughness,
right?
And
the
that
mindset.
He completely block out everything and just focus on that the shot at hand in a way that nobody else could do it. Yeah,
that's how we do this podcast.
Yeah, right.
So we go on from Philo Judaeus. We're going to have to accelerate here. I think we're enjoying ourselves too much.
Oh yeah, we're getting bogged down.
Yeah, it's going to be like a 3-hour episode.
We're not even close to the Renaissance, are we?
No, we're still in late antiquity.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to move ahead now to the Greek fathers.
All right.
So we move past Philo Judaeus. We come to the Greek fathers. We come to men like Clement of Alexandria. There's Alexandria. Origen, Basil of Caesarea, and his brother Gregory of Nyssa. Right, and they had this notion as well, the combination of Platonic dignity of man and the biblical teaching on what it means to be made in God's image.
Okay. All right. So, can you break down what the Greek fathers thought about these things and how they defined?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the big names here, of course, again, are Gregory of Nyssa. Right. So this is mid to late 4th century. So 380s, 390s. He was the younger brother of the famous Basil the Great. And he talks about, as Trinkhaus teaches us, he talks about these notions of theopoiesis or theosis. So making things the way God makes them, or even becoming like God.
Okay.
So to quote Trinkhaus here, 345, man's creation in the divine image indicated his original state of perfection, whereas after the fall, man was involved through the incarnation in a process of movement toward a restoration of the image in a heavenly state, finally fulfilling man's creation in the image and likeness of God.
Now, is he suggesting there that the idea is that after the fall,
right,
with
Genesis 3,
human beings' mind and intellect bodies are corrupted,
right?
But there is a path to redemption. There's a path to recovery in this life.
Yeah, well, it's not fulfilled to the next life, but it's because Christ became incarnate.
Okay,
right. God took on flesh.
Yep.
Because God took on flesh, now we see the route.
I see.
To how that original grandeur can be restored.
Okay.
And Nyssa describes it, Gregory of Nyssa describes it as a mimesis, imitation. Well, of course, this is entirely the Aristotelian idea. Education is imitation.
Right.
Right. Art is imitation. Either imitating nature, or sometimes nature, goes the other way and imitates art. It's a mimesis of God or of Christ. And they have a second idea in here, and that is the notion of a mirror, right? So you look inside yourself, a kind of self-knowledge, and reflected back to you are some of those fragments or those rudera of the original image of God.
Okay.
And so they serve as a kind of marker as to what you ought to become. So when you were trying to finish your Chicago Marathon, right, you dug deep, you looked down in there, right, past the sweat and the damaged track shoes, and you saw, I can do this, right? What spoke back to you was part of that initial endowment of divine dignity.
So this is
powered through,
kind of getting a glimpse of that, like in Stoic terms, that divine spark that resides in all of us.
I think that's another way of expressing it.
All right.
It's less clear to me, and we'd have to embark on a longer discussion, how that interfaces with the Greek fathers' notion of grace and Christ's incarnation, because it can't be reduced to a simple try harder.
Right.
That isn't what they thought.
Right. Just do it.
Exactly.
Right.
That's not at all what they thought. But it's a little harder to tease out exactly what they mean.
Okay. All right. Do we want to talk about where were the Latin fathers on all of this?
Well, of course, the big name here is Augustine, right? And Augustine in 2 works, his commentary or literal commentary on Genesis. Literal there doesn't mean what it means now, but it meant a literary commentary.
Yes.
And the second one was his work on the Trinity.
Okay.
Right. So this is early 5th century. And in that work on the Trinity, he says the best metaphor for the Trinity is within the human mind, right? So, Sunday school lesson, the Trinity is like...
water.
Right. Yeah. The Trinity is like... And there's all those bad analogies.
Yes.
Patrick. But what you want is a good analogy, and Augustine says the best is the human mind, which has these 3 elements: memory, intellect, and will, right? Memoria intellectus voluntas. You can't be a human being without those 3, and you can never have one of those without the other 2. And after the end of a long discussion, Augustine says, although this is the best, I'm paraphrasing, this is the best analogy for the Trinity, it's still not very good, so don't worry about it.
So now, did that idea, despite Augustine dismissing himself, did that take root and find its way into the Renaissance?
Absolutely.
Okay.
For sure. Yep. Right. This is how human beings are like God. This is our dignity. We can remember things. In the process of remembering, we are understanding them. And in the process of understanding and remembering them, we are desiring to do both things. That's the will. And then acting on our memory and understanding to do other things.
Right. Now, it's so interesting to me that, what happens, kind of between Augustine and the Renaissance, we're talking 1,000 years or so, right?
Right.
Of what happens to these ideas, and so what pops into my mind, if you look at like a medieval cathedral, and you look at the art in the medieval cathedral, and you have kind of the face of like an old bearded Christ in the dome,
right,
kind of glowering down at you. This idea that human beings are like God, and it seems to completely disappear.
Yeah.
And human beings are shuddering and hiding from the anger of this wrathful deity.
Well, this is another concept that emerges around this time called the contempt of the world, the contemptio mundi. It's a counter theme, right? And that is the notion of the misery of the human condition. And it's old too. It goes back to late 3rd, early 4th century, a guy named Arnobius of Sicca and his student Lactantius, Latin fathers. So the notion of the contempt of the world and the wretchedness of the human condition is present all along.
Right. So even contemporary with like Jerome and Augustine, you have these these desert fathers, right?
You're right.
Kind of, who are kind of denying the body, or
they're going after the noble savagery.
Exactly.
Like escape from society.
That's right. So it strikes me, to paint with a broad brush, it seems like that idea really survives into the medieval period,
right? And
this idea of the dignity of man really goes underground until it's rediscovered.
Well,
or not so much.
Not so much goes underground, but the two are in competition. And in the time of the Renaissance, this is the issue that has to be resolved. Can these two go together? The dignity of man and the wretchedness of the human condition, can these two be reconciled in any intellectual sense?
Yeah.
What you may be seeing in some of the artistic representations is one or the other.
Yeah.
Very much in ascendancy at some particular point in time.
Gotcha.
Well, we got to wrap this part up and get to our ads pretty soon, right?
Yeah.
But we should mention there are a number of other individuals like Boethius, Macrobius, and even the later Arabic philosophers are dealing with this concept of the dignity of man. I mean, you'll have to read, listener, you'll have to read the article on your own if you want the really deep dive. But we're just touching on some main points.
Right. And speaking of main points, we got to get to the ads.
All right.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Hackett Publishing. Hackett Publishing currently celebrating their 50th anniversary of being in business. It was stationed in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. These guys, they're my go-to for finding texts for myself and for my classroom. For the last 50 years, they've been producing affordable, accessible, high-class, well-done translations of not just classical works, but stuff from around the world of academia. And you can find everything they have to offer at HackettPublishing.com.
Would you say they are your go-to goat?
The greatest of all time?
That's right.
Absolutely, they are.
That's really entered the lexicon these days, hasn't it?
The GOAT, which is really interesting because that used to mean like, oh,
he's a GOAT.
He's a GOAT. He missed that field goal. He's the GOAT, right?
Right, or to get someone's GOAT.
Yeah.
But now it's been replaced.
It's been replaced. So these guys are the GOAT in terms of that current usage.
The good sense.
Yes.
The greatest of all time publishers. I'm looking at their website right now.
What do you see?
We have Thomas J. White, Discovering Philosophy. I didn't know it was lost, but White, unearthed it.
All right.
The Western Literary Tradition, Volume 2, from Jonathan Swift to George Orwell. That sounds very interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
Satire. Islamic Legal Theory. Plato's Laws, as translated by C.D.C. Reeve, a very simple, beautiful cover. 7 Myths of Military History. We've talked about before. Samurai, a source book. Your boys would love that, right?
They would, yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Right.
Destroying to Replace. We've got Essential Greek Historians, Noel Carroll, Classics in Western Philosophy of Art. Common Ground, Second Language Acquisition Theory goes to the classroom.
Man, so you can see just from that small sampling is that they cover such a wide breadth of topics. It's not just the incredible translations by Stanley Lombardo or Kresak that we've been using in our Aeneid series.
Or for the Ovid series, we got Ambrose and Lombardo.
Right. So, go to hackettpublishing.com.
Right.
Check out their offerings. Click through. It's just fun to browse through that.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think I do it all the time, though, don't I? I think you could say their breadth is fresh and minty.
All right. Moving on.
What's the coupon code?
Coupon code. So if you go to Hackett Publishing, you find the books you want, drop them into your little satchel, and type in the coupon code AN2022. That will get you 20% off and free shipping.
Check it out. This episode is also brought to you by Ratio Coffee. Jeff, I'm holding here in my hands.
Yeah, see that? Something kind of newsprinty.
That's correct. This is from the Monday, August 22nd edition of the Wall Street Journal. Mm-hmm. The headline is, you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Coffee primed to go higher.
So it's I'm gonna have to pay more for my grounds.
That's right.
My beans.
Quote, a poor harvest in the world's largest coffee producer threatens to push the cost of a cup of joe even higher.
Oh no.
Farmers in Brazil are dealing with the fallout from freakish weather last year. I hate freakish weather.
I do too.
Where plantations endured first drought and then frost. Some say their crop of higher-end Arabica coffee beans will be less than half what it could be in a good year.
Oh, no.
This is tough.
This is what this means? What does it mean?
Prices are going to go sky high.
Oh, no.
What is the coffee connoisseur going to do?
Well, you're going to have to stop going to your bar stocks, right?
That's right.
That's just going to hit you in the pocket.
Beanery and bagel blowout kind of place.
Imagine trying to get a cup there and then going to fill up your gas tank.
That's right.
Forget about it. As they say. You got to brew your own.
You got to brew your own.
Yeah.
And how should you do that? Maybe get one of those squirty, plasticky kind of Mrs. Coffee pots, right?
With a scorch pad underneath?
Yeah, and Kindle brick and
in the flagon that isn't so hulking.
That's right. And then there's the aroma of a brackish tang that wafts through your kitchen.
No, I'd say absolutely not.
Don't do that.
No, you need to go check out Ratio Coffee. That's what you got to do. And get one of their machines, the 6 or the 8.
Okay. But they're ugly, aren't they?
No,
they're kind of hideous. A good cup of coffee, but unsightly to look at.
Not at all. They're beautiful machines, right? In fact, this morning I went to my machine and get ready a cup for my wife and myself, and we were out of coffee.
No way.
It was a rough morning.
Prices are going high. What did you do?
Well, I had to make an emergency run is what I had to do. And so it came back, got it all set to go, hit that button.
Now there's multiple buttons you have to push, right? Like a Rube Goldberg kind of thing?
It's a one touch.
Pull a lever.
It's one touch.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's all there is to it. And it goes through its 3 stages. Mm-hmm. You got the intellect, you've got the will.
Hold on.
Sorry. You got
the first stage is Bloom. If I'm not,
and that's where the off gassing takes place.
Alan Bloom, right?
Of the closing of the American mind.
The closing of the American coffee machine.
right. So you have the Alan Bloom stage.
Okay.
And
the second one is the brew,
which some would say is maybe the most important.
I think it is because that's where the off gassing.
The off-gassing is in the bloom, right?
Right, like the Hitchcock movie, Bloom with a Brew.
Bloom with a Brew, exactly. Everybody's favorite. Then you have the brew stage.
Okay.
And that's where the reds, the scalding water goes through the
metallic veins
and down through your grounds and into your borosilicate hand-blown carafe.
Right.
And then
the third stage.
It's ready.
Yeah, but I find that a little both climactic and anticlimactic.
Oh, really? What's anticlimactic?
It's anticlimactic because the light's just saying ready. There's nothing that happens during that stage. That's the anticlimax.
Well, it's like the football player who gets a touchdown, right?
Right.
And they always say, act like you've been there before.
Okay.
You don't need to do the twirly dance. You just it's just like it's ready.
I never noticed, but there's no flashing light. There's no,
blaring siren.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. An air horn that goes off. What?
No,
it
looks. This machine knows it's cool.
Right.
And it says this is where it's at.
Okay.
Right. So if listeners
have we beaten that to death?
I think we have. So the listeners, if you want to get one of these beautiful machines, the 6 or its older, slightly fancier brother, the 8, you can go to ratiocoffee.com, click on the machine that you want, and if you're doing this in August still, type in the coupon code ANCO7C. 7C. And if in September, ANCOV4.
That's correct, V4.
And Dave, what will that get them?
It will get them 15% off either the Ratio 6, which comes in 3 lovely colors, or the Ratio 8, which comes in a wide array of aesthetically delightful options.
Yeah, these are incredible machines. You will not regret it.
Check it out.
All right, Dave. So as we get back into this, could you summarize some of the main ideas that we talked about in the first segment?
Sure. Let's let Trinkhaus summarize it. Finally, it may be argued, there was an inherent tension between the increasing secularism manifested in the expanding economic, political, and social activities of late medieval Europe, and those elements of medieval Christianity which stressed asceticism, withdrawal, contemplation, poverty, humility, the anguish, misery, and worthlessness of homo viator, earthly man. So man on a pilgrimage, man on a journey. To continue, there was no such tension between these new manifestations of the historical daimonism of human energy and the equally Christian vision of the dignity and excellence of man. This theme must therefore be considered as a deeply formative pattern of Renaissance thought and expression through its capacity to offer a resolution of this tension.
Okay.
So that's what we're after. Can these two things be combined?
Right. Okay. Excellent. So we're gonna head into the Renaissance.
That's
now,
right.
Right. And is it Petrarch that we should start with?
Yes. So we're gonna have 3 or 4 different individuals here: Francesco Petrarch, Coluccio Salutati. What a great name!
That is great.
A Florentine, Lorenzo Valla. And then we're going to wind up with 2 other individuals, Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola.
I had some of that on some
bet you
grilled
did.
Chicken last night.
I bet you did. Some Ficino.
Yeah, exactly.
It was excellent, I'm sure.
Great.
So these are the guys we're going to deal with.
All right. Now, when I think about Petrarch, I tend to think about he wrote some poetry. He's kind of he's kind of the father of the sonnet.
Yes.
Shakespeare kind of picks up the ball from him. But there's a lot more to Petrarch.
This guy's amazing.
Okay.
This guy is amazing. Those who have devoted their lives to the study of Petrarch, similar to, say, Cicero, Apuleius even, Plato, highly admirable because there's so much there.
Do you know some people who've dedicated their lives to studying Petrarch? Or
no, I don't. I know a few Renaissance scholars, but I don't know someone who specializes in Petrarch. Maybe we'll be fortunate enough to have one of those individuals listening. Yeah, and that man or woman can come on and share some real light with us.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So we start out with Petrarch, 1304 to 1374. He's part of the Trecento, an Italian humanist and poet. And in 1368, so this is what? This would be about 6 years before his death. He wrote a really interesting work, one to which I can relate, called De sui ipsius et multorum ignorantia. So, on his ignorance, his own ignorance,
and
the authors...
And those of many.
And many other people.
Right.
The subtitle was Why We're All Stupid. I think that's what he called it.
Right.
Yeah, but you can see here...
But he includes himself in that.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
You can see here that what Petrarch has done is he's going to talk about the combination of these 2 ideas. Human beings, right, have immense dignity because they are made in the image of God, Philo, as well as having all of this dignitas, Cicero and the Stoics, and yet there's such limitation built into who we are, so much ignorance.
Yeah. Okay. So, where should we go in this work? Should we? You want to read some Latin?
I'd like to read a little bit of his Latin here, and then we have a nice, although anonymous, translation I could not find the translator of this particular treatise. Didn't have time to translate it myself.
Okay.
So this is taken from a 1906 edition. It's a French edition, the Bibliothèque littéraire de la Renaissance, more or less. And the guy who put it together is Capelli. Capelli. So I'm going to read a little bit of Petrarch's On His Own Ignorance. Nunquamne igitur quiescemus, semper conflictabatur hic calamus, nullae nobis erdrant feriae, quotidie amicordrum laudibus, quotidie emulordrum jurgiis respondendum erdrit, nec invidiam aut latebrae excluserent, aut tempus extinserent, nec quietem mihi omnium ferme proquibus humanum labordat atque aestuat genus, redrum fuga pepererit.
Very nicely done. What do you think of his Latin?
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Is it?
It's gorgeous. Yeah. Just this week, I was in conversation with someone on the social medias. It was on the Facebooks or somewhere like that. And the question arose. Someone was reading, the person was reading the Vulgate. And they said, it's a very natural, good question. I'm not mocking the question. Mm-hmm. They said, it seems like Jerome is using quoniam, because, and quia, because, to mean that, as though it's indirect statement. Mm-hmm. And some other individual responded and said, yeah, that's very, very common in late antique and medieval Latin.
Right.
Is that, these words change meaning, to which I replied, thank goodness there was a Renaissance. Which not everyone agrees,
Yeah.
Some people like that kind of Latin. I love the Renaissance because it goes back to the classical forms.
Would you look at like Petrarch as kind of one of these guys, or maybe the main guy who pulls it back?
Yeah, he and Valla.
Okay.
Right? He and Valla, also Salutati and all the others, but they say, look, we have to clear away all the underbrush of Latin that sounds like vernacular. Mm-hmm. That sounds like Italian or Spanish or Portuguese. We got to clear it all away and go back to how did Cicero speak?
All right.
I like that.
Okay.
Not everybody likes it. I like it.
All right.
Now the translation.
Yes. Shall we never have any respite? Must this pen always needs fight? Shall we never have a holiday? Must we respond every day to praises from our friends? Every day make reply to the insults of envious rivals? Will no hiding place ever protect us from jealousy? Will no length of time extinguish envy? Shall I never find quiet repose by fleeing almost everything for which mankind strives and fervently exerts itself? Will my declining and wearied age not at last procure me a release? Envy is a persistent poison. Long since my age would have freed me from duties towards the state, it does not free me from envy. The state to which I owe so much gives me a discharge for my obligations. Envy, to which I owe nothing, disturbs me. Once, I must confess, the times encouraged a friendlier style. A more serene manner of speaking was always congenial to my nature, and would befit my present age. Pardon me, my friends. And you, reader, pardon me, whoever you are. And you above all, my dearest Donato, to whom I tell all this, forgive me. I must speak, not because it is the best thing to do, but because it is so hard to refrain. Reason advises me to keep silent, an indignation which, if I am not mistaken, is proper and dignified, and a just grief extort words from me. Most avidly craving for peace, I am thrust into war. Again, you see, we are driven forward against our will. Again, we are dragged before a censorious tribunal. I do not know whether I ought to call it the tribunal of envious friendship or of friendly envy. What is impossible for you, malicious grudge, if you can inflame even the hearts of friends? Much I have had to experience before. This kind of evil I have never yet experienced.
Oh, very nicely done. Yeah. Very nicely done. Morgan Freeman, James Earl Jones, they got nothing on you.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that.
It's very, very nice.
Yeah.
So he's got to go to war, once again, polemic, right? And a little bit of this is just, de jure. It's just part of pro forma. It's just part of the genre. Mm-hmm. But he says, I got to pick up the cudgels and I got to prove my own ignorance.
Yep.
And the ignorance of many people. And in so doing, says Trenckhaus, he's trying to unite these two divergent themes. Man has inherent dignity. The human condition is miserable.
Yeah.
It's wretched.
Right. And if you think about the times in which he lived, the Trecento was a very violent century.
Yes, that's right.
You have the 100 Years' War going on. I think just after Petrarch's death, you have the bubonic plague.
That's right.
Right? Oh no, it was in the 1340s. So Petrarch lived through the bubonic. So I mean, things like that would I think speak to a lot of people and say, yes, the condition of humanity is one of misery.
Right.
So a very difficult time to be musing on these kinds of things and trying to combine them. Yeah.
And what he's attacking is he is attacking the late scholastic over-reliance upon Aristotle. And he doesn't like it, right? But interestingly, Trinkaus says he does so from the position of a devout Christian.
Yeah.
He's reviving the pagan interest, but says, Trinkaus, Petrarch was deeply Christian and deeply religious. He was quite clear and quite aware that these classical authors were not. An even more compelling and admired mentor was St. Augustine, who had found for himself and offered to the world a way of reconciling the Christian revelation with those values of the ancients which were culturally, morally, and politically necessary for responsible life in the chaotic historical and natural world. So still drawing on Augustine.
Yes.
All these years, 800 years later.
Right.
900 years later.
Yes. And I think we talked on this on the podcast in other episodes about how a lot of the Renaissance and beyond the Renaissance was a wrestling with Aristotle, right? And Aristotle held in such high esteem. Particularly, I think of guys like Galileo.
Yes.
And just Aristotle's view of the universe and the planetary system, that was almost scripture.
That's right.
And so to deviate from Aristotle anywhere for a lot of these scholars in the Renaissance was troublesome.
It's very, very troubling.
You're asking for trouble.
Right.
Yep.
So how did Petrarch, how did he reconcile these things?
Yeah.
He did so by stressing grace, right? He stressed grace. This is what he got from Augustine and his Confessions. Grace is the way to overcome, a grace given by God, to overcome the despair and the misery of the human life and move toward that restoration of the image of God in men and women. So it's says Trinkaus, it's the retention of a spiritual self-confidence that was identical with confidence in the ever-available divine mercy of the Creator.
I see.
Yeah, that's 354.
Gotcha. Right, and of course that's a notion that's completely absent.
Absolutely.
In a Greek a pre-Christian Greek theological worldview.
Yeah,
right?
There's nothing there.
Right.
Nothing there like that. Mm-hmm. All right. So then we go on to two other thinkers who contributed to this.
We got Valla and
Salutati.
Okay.
Coluccio Salutati.
All right.
So he sought a reconciliation of the relationship of the individual, right? The individual mind to the mind of God, and putting together these two disparate notions once again: human misery, human dignity. Lorenzo Valla went in a slightly different way.
How did he?
Well, he found in Augustine, says Trinkaus, a Christian Epicureanism. Now, this is really surprising, because we would think naturally that Epicureanism and Christianity incompatible.
Would not mix.
That's right. The focus on pleasure. So Lorenzo Valla, says Trinkaus, found in Augustine certain eudaimonistic, happiness-based elements, which he transformed into a Christianized Epicureanism and a rhetorical theology that was voluntaristic, right? That's the basic notion of the will. Man in the image and likeness of God was a Trinitarian spirit or soul, a single substance with the three qualities of energy, intellect, and emotion. So he substituted,
a couple,
the will and the memory. Now it's energy and emotion. Playing around with categories is really what Valla is trying to do, because he has a slightly different motivation than Petrarch. He's later, right? He's a much later contemporary.
Okay, yeah.
And he lived from what? What do we have as dates here?
1407 to 1457.
Yeah, okay. So
a century after.
The generation after, definitely. So heading in a slightly different direction.
Okay.
And then we come to the conclusion, right?
Yeah.
We come to the Florentine Platonists.
Okay.
The two guys that we talked about earlier. And these would be Marsilio Ficino. Right? Mm-hmm. And Pico della Mirandola.
All right. And
so what do we know about these guys, Jeff?
These are names that are completely new to me.
Oh, come on. We've talked about these guys before.
We have, but all those Italian names start to kind of blur together for me. So what distinguishes the thought of these guys? How are they responding to Petrarch, Valla, and the ancients?
Yes. Well, they really are striving to get the revival of Platonism, Plato in particular, trying to get that squared away with what they believed based on Christian revelation.
Okay.
As access to the scriptures and access to Plato, they really come to the fore. So this fellow Ficino, a very fascinating biography, born in 1433, ordained as a priest in 1473. One of his first tasks was that Cosimo de' Medici, so this would be the father of Lorenzo the Great, told him translate all of the works of Plato into Latin. And he's the first individual to have done that.
This had not been done before.
That's correct.
Okay.
And it coincides with the rise of the printing press, so now everybody can read this.
Excellent.
And that's really important.
All right.
So Ficino has two ideas,
all right,
says Trinkhaus, two aspects of his thought that tried to bridge the gap between, again, dignity of man, misery of man as a pilgrim. Those ideas are the role of reason. Reason is powerful. And the second is a stress on man's natural appetite for immortality and deification.
Now, how does that work? How does that inform this notion of dignity? That would strike me as being antithetical to the idea of striving for immortality, striving for deification. That always gets you cut down by Nemesis in the stories I'm familiar with.
Well, it seems that Ficino mapped out ways in which human beings are like God. He had actually 12 different characteristics of God, according to Trinkhaus, which man was driven by his will to make actual. So it's kind of like magic, honestly. It's supernatural. Says Trinkhaus, while it is true that Ficino also emphasizes many magical and supernatural powers with which he believes man is endowed, this is not at the expense of or in diminution of his deep appreciation of man's secular, this-worldly achievements as signs of man's natural appetite to become God.
Okay.
So we want to become like God. That's part of our appetitive desire, and we can strive toward that, and that is enough to overcome the limitations of human misery.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
So the last point we want to make probably is this individual Pico.
Okay, Pico.
Pico della Mirandola. This was an individual who lived to the age of 31 only.
That's it.
He was a prodigy. He's a brilliant man. And in 1486, so this was right before his death, about, 8 years before his death. So he was in his 20s, right? 23, 24.
My goodness, yeah.
He wrote a work called De Hominis Dignitate, on the dignity of the human being, the dignity of man. This is the high water mark of the Renaissance idea of human dignity.
Okay.
So he's combining all of these threads, all of these disparate strands that we've been talking about into an extraordinarily eloquent essay, a treatise, which is meant to be the final word on this topic.
Right. And would you say that it, for all intents and purposes, it is?
I don't think so.
Nope?
No.
Okay.
I don't think it's the final word, but it shows tremendous learning, and it's very beautiful, it's fantastic Latin, and it was very persuasive. And so when people think about the Renaissance idea of the dignity of man, they're really talking about Mirandola's oration, his speech.
It's kind of sad that he's not more of a almost, maybe not household name, but better known.
Yeah, nobody knows him.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So we have here a little excerpt, and this is translated by a guy named A. Robert Caponigri, which I think means black goat.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
It does. Black goat. Yeah.
Right. And so here's a little excerpt of Mirandola's on the dignity of man. Could you read this, please? I've been reading a lot of quotes from Trinkhaus.
Sure. God the Father, the mightiest architect, had already raised, according to the precepts of his hidden wisdom, this world we see, the cosmic dwelling of divinity, a temple most august. He had already adorned the supercelestial region with intelligences, infused the heavenly globes with the life of immortal souls, and set the fermenting dung heap of the inferior world teeming with every form of animal life.
I like a teeming dung heap.
I do. Yeah, like most people do.
Okay.
Right. But when this work was done, the divine artificer still longed for some creature which might comprehend the meaning of so vast an achievement, which might be moved with love at its beauty and smitten with awe at its grandeur. When, consequently, all else had been completed, as both Moses and Timaeus testify, he's bringing together Plato and the scriptures, right?
That's correct.
Interesting. In the very last place, he bethought himself of bringing forth man.
There you go.
You know, it's interesting. Like, kind of halfway through that quote, the language he's using is, I'm saying, this almost kind of presupposes deism, right? The divine watchmaker or whatever.
Right.
But then it gets very personal.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's also highly Ovidian, right? This is the beginning of the Metamorphoses.
Yeah, exactly.
Some higher creature was still lacking.
Yeah.
Right. And he says, so God wanted something to admire his handiwork.
Right.
Might be moved with love at its beauty and smitten with awe at its grandeur.
Right. With mind and emotion that animals simply do not have.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that brings it really to an end.
Yeah.
In addition to this one final quote from our friend
Mr. Trinkhaus?
Charles Trinkhaus.
Okay.
The idea of the dignity of man, page 361, the idea of the dignity of man did not cease to find exponents among both philosophers and writers in the 16th and 17th centuries in Italy and elsewhere.
So it doesn't end with Pico here. It goes on.
No.
Right.
He's the high water mark, but we're still thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And as we said at the beginning of this episode, somewhere along the way, this notion of immense human dignity evaporated, changed. I don't know what happened to it.
Yeah.
You have some particularly undignified moments in your life that you'd like to share with the audience?
Usually any kind of trip to the drive-through of Taco Bell after 10 p.m.
That's undignified?
It's very undignified, right? I always find myself covered in shame and indignity whenever that craving comes upon me, right? What about you? You got
any number of wardrobe choices. I once went to teach a philosophy class. I think it was. This was within recent memory. I was wearing a new pair of pants.
Yes.
That my wife had bought for me. My wife had bought. These will work nicely. Wear these. Okay, sure. So I wear them to class. Hadn't removed all the stickers.
Oh, I've done that same thing.
So all up and down my pants are the stickers, telling the size and where I bought them. And a very kind student, with a bemused smile, pointed out, Dr. Noe, I think you might want to remove those. I tried to play it cool. No, I want those to be there.
Right.
It's part of my decus and my decorum. That's my dignitas.
That exact thing happened to me as a TA at Northwestern. And I remember also teaching a Greek class with my sweater completely inside out.
Oh, no. Or the time the undergrad said to me, it must be laundry day based on your appearance. Yeah,
right.
So no dignitas there.
But one of the things I've always liked about the profession of being a professor is that kind of quirkiness and weirdness is almost expected.
Yes,
there's
they
kind of that
expect
cliche,
us to be
a little odd,
disheveled and absent-minded.
Right.
Well, that wraps it up, Jeff.
It does. Yep. We got some thanks to give out. Thanks as always to Mishka, who edits this up and makes us sound great.
Yes.
Scott Van Zen and Ken Tamplin for the great music you hear throughout.
Love it.
Love those guys. If you want to shout out like Mr. Cray or Dr. Cray had at the top of the show, write to us. You can write to Dave at adnauseum.com. Don't forget the V.
Or Jeff at adnauseum.com. There's also a V there, adnavseum. We would love to hear from you.
Yep.
You can pick up a t-shirt, a Quae Nocent Docent Erasmian themed t-shirt at our website. You could check out the Moss Method for Greek. We're running a back-to-school special through September 1st.
Fantastic.
You can get 10% off. Go to mossmethod.com. Check out the free offerings.
All right.
You can check out the more than 1,800 free Latin instructional videos.
1,800?
1,800.
Man, you've been
joke.
busy. Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on the 7th year of the project now.
Wow, fantastic.
I've got a lot of Renaissance guys. No Pico yet. I should put some Pico up there.
Yeah.
Everybody loves a little Pico.
Definitely.
Check that out. You can check out my Latin course. I take you ab initio from the ground up. You can learn how to read and enjoy the Latin we're covering. Mm-hmm. Jeff, what are we talking about next week?
We're going to dive back into the Aeneid, book 5, and talk about a book that sees dignity in athletic prowess.
Yes.
This is the book.
It does. Mm-hmm. It's the funeral games for Anchises. And there's also some drama. Juno tries to destroy the boats.
Yeah, right.
Good stuff in there.
Good stuff. Looking forward to it, right?
Yep. And I think, Jeff, you have the gustatory parting shot.
I do. This comes from one Angela Pipos. From her book, The Goddess Advantage.
You've read that, I'm sure. And she featured in one of the chapters, maybe?
Right. And she writes, instead of going out on Saturday night as planned, I decided to stay in with a few of my closest friends from the complex carbohydrate family. Well, actually, like most of my friends, they're not that complex.
That's great. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.